Today I'm going to share with you all what we've built at the Colorado Department of Revenue and how we've invested in a data culture through data governance and data management. So a little bit about us. We are a department of 9 different mission divisions, all with competing priorities. And we're a team of 1,700 plus folks helping serve the Coloradans. Now, my main focus at the Colorado Department of Revenue is ensuring that our data is safe, secure, and accessible to folks who need it to make operational decisions. I do have some responsibilities within AI. That's a little bit of a newer topic. It's the hot topic these days. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but today we're just going to focus on data governance, data management related initiatives. So over the past 2 years, the Colorado Department of Revenue has put together a lot of investment in training, in resources, in data infrastructure, and I'm going to share with you all how we kind of created that and tell you a little bit about our journey. Candidly, there were actually 2 different approaches that we took, and they were both working in tandem, but we'll kind of get to that surprise a little bit later. There's a fun little analogy I like to use, and as you'll see throughout this presentation, I'm a big fan of analogies. So first and foremost, let's start with a top-down approach. In the audience, where are my executives? My CIOs, my CDOs, division heads? Okay. Couple folks. So keeping those hands raised, how many of you meet with your data teams on a regular basis? Really? Okay, that's great. Then I don't have to scold anybody. That's awesome, because we're going to talk a little bit more about that and why communication is so key. So looking at our top-down approach, a couple of the things that we did to ensure that this was going to be successful from that top-down view. First and foremost, we have a great executive sponsor, Michael Arrington, who's our Chief Strategy Officer. And really what he helped with was to get that executive buy-in, because again, at the end of the day, how do we, the data folks, really help you all, the executives, understand the ROI, understand why you're putting your dollars and your budget towards data management, towards data infrastructure. And look, it's not easy, but it does start with a conversation. And really what happened at DOR was we sat down and talked with our then executive director, Mark Ferrandino, and we started figuring out that, okay, there's a ton of data here, but how do we make sense of this? And so that was the initial executive buy-in was, all right, we understand the problem. We don't necessarily know how to fix it today, but we're going to get there. So we got that initial executive buy-in. And once we started getting some resources pulled, we started talking about data governance, started talking about policy, start building, as I like to call it, the sandbox to let the data folks play in that sandbox. We're going to go ahead and design what type of wood, how big the sandbox is, but we're going to leave it up to the data folks to decide what color that sand is, what type of sand it is, the grain and all that, and also what kind of toys to play with. But obviously, we don't want to set off any bells and whistles, so approved toys only, don't want any of the IT folks getting any red flags. But we went ahead and started building out that data governance and those policies to govern how we handle data. And finally, we started working through our multi-year road mapping. There's a lot of projects that we're doing, again, across 9 different divisions. So again, budgetary constraints, resource constraints, competing priorities. Now we have to figure out where does data fit into that table. That's a pretty large table. So we had to start bridging that gap and figuring out how do we get the data folks in the room and how do we get those executives, like all of you who already are talking with your data folks, how do we get them to be talking to them a little bit more? So a couple of our best practices that I wanted to highlight really do stem from that communication piece, but without having proper upskilling, proper training, we would have been at a very big disadvantage. We would have had to rebuild all of our teams. We would have had to rebuild all of our different infrastructure. So what we went out and did was we invested in and built a team from the ground up called our Organizational Development and Engagement Team, or again, we're all in government, we like acronyms, ODE. They are our internal training team that when I've worked with them with my team or other teams across DOR work with them, you'll give them some content, you'll give them a little bit of a start, and they'll go off and prosper and start building that training. So a great example of this is when we started building that data governance policy and some of the other rules and manuals around that, we gave them all of this information, had multiple calls over a course of, I want to say, 2 or 3 months, and build out a comprehensive training. The main focus and the main audience was our data stewards, but what we found was as we started to open up the training to other folks across DOR, we started seeing the people that were signing up for this weren't data folks. which was kind of incredible because now we're starting to see a culture where not just the data teams are engaged, now we've got your frontline staff, your folks at the DMV, your folks at taxation services who are now engaged in data governance. So that might all sound really nice and we've got the rose-colored glasses on, but let's talk about where we might have came up short, and this is a lesson learned. When we're working on that top-down approach, our then executive director, Mark Ferrandino, asked us to build a large executive dashboard. Again, keeping in mind 9 different mission divisions. Not that that's any, mystery or that's so unique to the Department of Revenue in Colorado, but we had to try and pack this thing with a lot of different metrics and a lot of different visuals. Well, long story short, it was a bust. And as Michael Arrington, our Chief Strategy Officer, who led some of that project, would say, we failed forward. What we ended up finding out about this is that a large executive dashboard was only going to service our executive director's office. It wasn't going to service our mission divisions. So we took some of those resources towards the tail end of that project, and we started injecting them into the divisions and started really trying to build a culture there. And now we have a couple of public dashboards. One of them is the MED. Another one's going to be the DMV. They have an internal one right now that's based off Tableau, but they're going to be launching one in the next fiscal year or two. That really started to show that culture really coming through even from a top-down approach. But now let's go to our data stewards, our architects, our custodians, our analysts. Where are my nerds at? Come on, don't be shy, I know. Sometimes we're antisocial. Got a couple in the audience? Okay, great. With those hands raised, how many of you are talking with your executive leadership on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis about data needs, data priorities? Here and there? Okay. So maybe we need to bang on that door a little bit louder so folks will hear us, that are making those larger high-level decisions. And so in our experience, what we actually had was kind of a different scenario. We had a lot of anecdotal information, institutional knowledge between each of the divisions, but we lacked alignment. So what we had to start with was building a robust data inventory to make sure that we all knew what data each of us had, who was responsible for that information, how it was being reported, and where. That was the first exercise we had to start with. Then, once we started figuring out where data lived, we started figuring out what skills we were lacking. So a lot of folks here, I'm sure this is no foreign concept, but how many folks are still somewhere in your division or department having a filing cabinet, have paper? Yeah. Pre-pandemic, when I was with the Marijuana Enforcement Division, all of our licensing was done on paper. We had a filing cabinet, and when I ran that program for 3 years as the manager of data analytics, oh man, that was a nightmare. We ended up building a data lake. But in any case, we had to figure out what that skills gap was. Because if we were so used to paper and we were so used to just going to that filing cabinet, how do we actually pull information out of the systems and tools that we're using? SQL, Python, name any other coding language, name any other tool. We had some folks that didn't know how to do that. So we had to go back to ODE, if you remember, Organizational Development, and now I even forgot what that acronym means. See? Government, we love acronyms, but we forget what they mean. We actually had to go back to them and start doing some upskilling and internal training. That allowed us to then take over and leverage tools like Tableau to be able to visualize data. But none of this was really possible without collaboration. And I'll explain a little bit further. What that really meant for us is getting alignment across all those 9 divisions. So I run a monthly meeting. It's called the DOR Data Management Group. We sit with all of the data stewards, a couple of our executive sponsors, a couple of folks even within our IT department because we have a federated IT. They come and listen to what the data stewards are working on, different project priorities, and any of those roadblocks or gaps. They're now a part of that conversation. And what that allowed us to do is to be able to now encourage all of our data stewards to start having their own meetings individually with those executive teams. A really great example of this is in our DMV. So Electra is the executive director of the DMV. Melissa and Mitch are both her deputies that handle 2 different aspects of that division. Stephanie is the data steward. They meet monthly to go through the operational roadmap, and they are constantly moving tiles around, moving priorities around, and making sure that data always has a seat at the table. And it's been pretty remarkable because, again, I came from the MED. Over 3 years, we built a data lake. We did LLMs before LLMs were cool. We started doing dashboarding before dashboarding was really a thing at the state. And now we've got the DMV in the last 2 years that has been able to create an internalized dashboard for all of their DMV offices, get those prioritizations and resources needed in order to support it, and further, they're trying to develop an external dashboard for the public. So I would say having that conversation really spurred that on and made sure that data always had a place in that organizational dashboard, or in that roadmap. But again, taking off the rose-colored glasses, we had a situation where when I joined the executive director's office, there was a project that was going on that focused on the budget team, where essentially we were taking all the different budget spreadsheets and trying to turn them into a Tableau dashboard. We had quite a few different things happen there. First and foremost, that team got cut in half. Fortunately, a couple people left the department, so we had a resource constraint. A lot of them were legacy users of Excel, so VBA. Didn't really know how to SQL query, didn't really know how to use Tableau, weren't necessarily the most willing. You know, I know sometimes change management's hard. So we had an issue there where we're trying to build out this dashboard so that it's usable across all 9 divisions for budget, but we just had a bunch of headwinds going against us, and instead what we ended up doing was cutting back, transferring some of this resource down to the DMV, to a couple of the other divisions, and we were able to focus more on the division-centric piece and giving the data stewards what they need. What that looked like was building up our upskilling and doing a lot of training on Tableau so that we could prepare and get those divisions ready for whatever public dashboards or internal dashboards that they were going to build. So as you all can see, we had 2 different approaches. A top-down, where Michael Arrington's working with the EC, making sure that they're aware of all these different data priorities. I'm working with the data stewards, data analysts, and the divisions. And slowly those conversations started to kind of percolate and come up to what we'll say is more or less a sandwich approach. So if Michael Arrington's up top and my data stewards are down here, that leaves me somewhere in the middle. So for my folks in the audience, who is in that same position where you're kind of that bridge between the folks on the ground floor and the folks who are making all those leadership decisions? I got a couple, great. Well, I'm gonna leave you with a couple things that you can do today to help you help your teams. So first and foremost, getting that alignment between executive leadership and your data teams. Making sure that they're talking, making sure that that space is available so that they can sit down and get into the details. Little marijuana joke we used to always say whenever we'd have to get into data, we'd say, oh, okay, let's dig into the weeds a little bit. There was a little bit of truth to that, you know, working in cannabis. So we've got alignment. Next, we're gonna start building our multi-year roadmaps. And again, data's now at the table. They have a seat, they're talking with executive leadership, they're telling them what they need, how they're gonna go about their project cycle for the next fiscal years or so. That's great, but none of that matters. And again, I tried to do A, B, C, make it a little bit easier to remember. If you don't do collaborate at the very, very end, alignment and build almost mean nothing. It becomes a very dry, short-winded conversation. You build one roadmap that has data on it, and great, the next couple fiscal years, data has no prioritization, has no really skin in the game. You need to have that collaborative space. So again, having a space where your data stewards, your executive leadership are speaking together, as well as internally at your subsections, divisions, however your organization is set up, making sure that they're all working with each other. Because when we start doing that, we start seeing a culture that kind of spreads from the epicenter. We start seeing people who aren't even involved with data now wanting to get curious and now wanting to work with data. And then we get the executives who actually understand how the sausage is made, understand the problems that us data folks have, trying to dig out information to help them for, dare I say, legislative session. We just ended ours on Wednesday, so we're very happy about that one to be done. But any type of data request, being able to empower them to go out and help their executives. That's what we're trying to bridge. So ABC, align, build, collaborate. And with that, I'll pause for any questions. I think, yeah, they have mics somewhere. I think there's one there.
I was wondering, you mentioned that some of your data resources got pushed down to the individual departments. When that happened, did you maintain a dotted line to you as a central leader of those data folks within the individual departments, or did they immediately start reporting to those individual data stewards or whoever at that level?
So we have an internal organization that's called ISD, Innovation, Strategy, and Delivery, and it kind of acts as this internal consulting arm. And so whenever we have a situation where we're going to take resources and go from high level or one division and switch, we always engage with them because they're more of the project management professionals. I would say, more of a data scientist by trade. I do have a PMP and a ACP and all these other acronyms that are project management related, but they're really the professionals in that, and they're able to move those project resources around, move that money around, and make sure that as we go through any type of realignment or any switch, we make sure that there's, you know, low debt, things like that, so we don't have any waste. Hopefully that answers. Yeah, any other questions, concerns, cries of outrage? Oh. Mm-hmm. So the way that our model is set up is OIT, so I'll just use that as an acronym, Office of Information Technology, Governor's Office of Information Technology. They have a whole separate org chart, but what they do is they inject a couple directors, a couple resources or consultants in throughout the organizations and all the different agencies. So for us, for example, we have a gentleman named Matthew St. John who knows all of our project priorities, knows all of our roadmaps, and we communicate that with them. We have quarterly updated meetings. I meet with him personally because, you know, got to build relationships, got to keep that conversation flowing. I meet with him probably once a month just to talk through, especially as we're getting into, you know, AI adoption and AI implementation, making sure that we're aligned. And then if we need any project resources or a consultant, they will go out, and again, like I mentioned to the other gentleman who asked, we have ISD that starts building that project portfolio, building that project plan, and we're aligned with OIT. So if we need to tap into a consultant, because again, data folks are not cheap, even in public sector when we don't pay as much as private, they're not cheap. So we have to make sure that budget's aligned, we have a contract that we can use, OIT can bring in a resource, and then we can finish on time. IT manages all of our cyber, manages all of our frontline security, things like that. We're just really, again, I'll use the analogy of the sandbox. We're in the sandbox, they're the fence around the backyard. Hopefully that makes sense. All righty. Mm-hmm. Of course.